and welcome back to Lise Loves Paper. I'm Elise, and today we're doing a art journal process video. So this journal is in an old book. I just found one at the secondhand bookstore. I like the size of it, and I've done a lot of prep before we got to this part. So I went through and I ripped out about every fourth page. I do plan to tape pages together if I feel like they need them later on as I'm going through it. I kind of just left a lot of it up in the air. And I have not gessoed every single page, but I did gesso a good handful of them very lightly so you could see the text through most of the pages. But with this spread here, before we started recording, I actually went and put several more coats of white gesso on top so that I could start with almost a white background, because that's what I wanted here. I didn't want to see any text popping through. So all I've been doing so far is using that Dina Wakley acrylic paint and just doing it one color at a time, and I'm using a palette knife to add it. Now I love palette knives. As you watch me do this, we'll have time for a little tangent here. So last year, I guess, I don't know, it was a couple months ago, it was in the fall, I took 2 classes at the local community college, art classes, and one of them was a watercolor class, watercolor class, and the other was an acrylic class. And before this, I'd really had absolutely no formal art training. I think I've said that before, not even in high school or anything like that. I've always been crafty, but I've never been arty, and I've always felt like I can't draw, so I can't do art. But anyway, I really wanted to learn, and so I took these classes, and that's why I took both watercolor and acrylic. So when I was taking them, I loved watercolor. I've always loved watercolor. I quite enjoy doing it. It's still my favorite. And when I was doing acrylic, I will tell you, I hated it for the majority of the class. I just really didn't enjoy it. I didn't like the way my paintings were turning out. I didn't like the look of the brush strokes. I didn't like how shiny some of the paint was. It was just not my thing. Pause here. I did add some more gesso back on there because I wanted to push it back and add some more layers. Okay, getting back to the acrylic story. So it wasn't until toward the end of the 8-week course that the teacher branched out beyond the typical class stuff, and she had us use palette knives. And it wasn't until I actually used palette knives that I fell in love with acrylic. So if you're like me, maybe try a different way of putting it on the paper. Now here, I messed up twice. I wanted to try and use my finger just for a different texture on the page, and it didn't work out like I wanted it to. So you saw I went back over it with a palette knife, and then I also put way too much paint on there. I was really irritated at myself. So you can see I just kind of wiped my finger off. I have a paper laid down on my desk, so it's going to be scrap paper, and I just, threw the extra paint on there. And I was so irritated that I basically covered up the entire right side of this spread with that teal. In the end, it doesn't end up mattering. I'm just adding another layer of each color to add some more texture and depth. And I did not include it, but I am drying. I'm using my heat tool that you see right there to dry in between each layer because I'm impatient. I don't like waiting for paint to dry, but I also don't want my colors to mix. I want them to stay nice and bright. So I'm adding each of the colors there multiple times. Now, here I added some gray splatters. I think, here I am now adding some white splatters. I should have just used white from the beginning. I had the white background. I really like a crisp white, but it was new. I was excited about the new Distress Oxide color, and I wanted to try it. So, we tried it. Tried something else. Okay, now I want to add some stencils. You see my stencil book here. I have 2 of them, and this is just how I keep my stencils semi-organized. And I think one of them's from Echo Park or one of those brands, and then the other one, I believe, is a Dina Wakley one. If you slow down the video or go back and pause, you can actually see what I've written on the pages to see who they're from and what they're called. Now, stencil experts, please help me here because I am by no means a stencil expert. I struggle with it a lot. I kind of avoid it because I never love how it turns out, and when I see other people do it, it looks effortless, and I always end up getting like paint on the back of my stencil, and then it gets all over my page in places I don't want it. Um, I do know the tip about using very, very thin layers and going slow, but if you have any other tips, please send them my way. I would love to know, because I want to like it. I love the effect it adds. I hesitate to use it because I don't like the mess of it, I guess, and how it messes up my page because of that back issue. Now here I'm trying to decide. I thought for a while about doing it sideways, and I decided no, that would have been too much contrast. Um, but I did decide to add just a little bit more of that big one, so there wasn't just the one on the page. It might end up getting completely covered up here in a little bit, but I did decide to add it for balance, and I do like the way it looks now, at least. That paint I'm using is a navy, and I'm really liking the way that looks. It's a little less harsh than a black would have been, but it adds a nice contrast to the bright colors and the white that's already there. So now I'm adding a little bit more paint on top of my stencil. I wanted to push it back. I didn't want it to be in the front, and so I'm adding just a teeny tiny bit here and there, and I'll add a little bit of yellow here, I believe, in a minute. Yeah. Just so that it doesn't stand out quite so much. It looks a little more integrated, a little more part of it, rather than just like sitting plopped directly on top of the page. So now I'm doing the same thing with the white gesso. Again, just a little bit more white in there. It was getting a little too bright and dark, so I always like to add some white when I can. Just white, to me, makes a page sing. And it really helped it breathe right here as well. And then I decide to go in. I had a little bit of that teal and the yellow paint left, and I had gotten that other stencil out. And so we had this big stencil, and I wanted to add a little bit of contrast with a littler scale stencil. I'm not sure how successful it was, honestly, because you can hardly see it, honestly. It's there if you look, but you have to look really, really hard. And I don't know if that's just because I needed to do another coat, or if I need to put the paint on thicker or whatever. But I don't regret doing it, but I don't think it really added much to the page here overall. But, we try things, and sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. So that was honestly all background work. Now we're moving on to the focal point, and I had this brand new stencil. It was a stencil and a mask, and you see that I'm using the stencil part of it to kind of block out and decide where I want it to be, which is right there. I have it hanging off the edge just a little bit on purpose, and my plan is to like cover the rest of everything else in white gesso. And you'll see here, like the white gesso, because it is gesso, just doesn't cover very easily, and it's going to take a lot of work to get it to cover that background completely. So I do decide to only do the right hand side here. If I had used white acrylic paint, yes, it would have covered a lot better, but I also don't like that the white acrylic paint is shiny. So you see here, I'm thinking, 3, 2, 1, and by the magic of video editing, you did not have to sit through the painful layers and layers and layers and layers and layers of white gesso to get it looking there. If you see it in person, you can actually still see a little bit of the paint through it, but it was good enough. Now what I'm doing here is, again, bringing in more white. So we have a huge block of white on the right hand side, and while we do have a little bit of white on the left hand side, it was feeling a little bit disconnected, and so I decided to add these marks with my paintbrush to kind of bring those together. So I will do this. I'll add a couple of layers, but we can go on another tangent while we're watching me work here. What do you like to do when you're doing those repetitive tasks? So while I was working on that right hand side and painting over and over, painting and drying and painting and drying, I was catching up on episodes of Abbott Elementary. Now, I think I'm late to the boat here, but I'm absolutely loving it, and it's fun for me because way long ago I was an elementary school teacher for a hot minute. So it's fun to see from that, but it's also really fun to see because my next career was working for an educational publishing company. So a group that created those pretty displays that you see teachers put on the walls. And so as I'm watching the episodes, I'll be like, ooh, that's from my company, and ooh, that's from my company, and ooh, I worked on that. And I got so tickled because in one of the latest episodes, actually, they had a bulletin board set that was very prominent in the background that was a labor of love of mine. And it was long and hard, and we actually did it during the pandemic, so I did it from home, working remotely with the artists. I don't draw it, I'm the idea person, and I did the research and the words and that kind of stuff. But it was just so fun to see it. So now I've moved on, and I feel like it needs something else, not just paint. And I tore some pages out of books. Now, as a reader, that absolutely killed me. But I will say this is a secondhand book. It is a book I've actually read, and it is a book that's pretty popular. So I justified it in my mind because, there's a ton of copies out there. And this one has been loved and used, and I enjoyed it. So I feel okay using it for this. And I did intentionally use a newer book because I do not tend to like the vintage look. I don't like that yellowed paper quite as much. So I find that picking newer books gives me a wider paper. And so that's the other reason that I picked that Leanne Moriarty book. So I'm just punching various heart sizes here. I end up punching extra, of course, but it's better to have more than have to go back and do it. So I'm cleaning up here. I'm a messy crafter. My desk looks like everything exploded when I'm working, so I do try and clean up a little bit as I go along. I so admire people who have the cleanest desk as they're working. That is not me. So now I pulled out these Sarasa clip pens, I believe, and they're the vintage colorway. And I will freely admit the only reason that I bought this set was so that I could have that navy blue that I'm using right here. So I decided to do kind of a messy doodle outline on these hearts to make sure that they stood out, because there's already a lot going on the page. And with the white there, they were going to get kind of lost unless I did something. So that's all I'm doing here, just kind of doodle, messy border around all of these hearts. Now, I did a variety of sizes so that we could have a variety of scale in there, because we have this giant heart, and so I wanted to make sure that we had, other things in there to help support it, but not take away from it, and, all that good stuff. So now I decided that this heart needed an outline too. It just, I don't know, felt kind of plopped on there, and I really am glad that I did this. I feel like it makes it a lot more integrated, a lot more intentional looking. The messy border was a little messier than I anticipated, but I just added more doodles and made it look intentional. So here I am laying things out. I intentionally put the bigger text page heart on the left side to balance out the giant one on the right hand side. If I had put it over there, it would have felt way too heavy on the right side. So now I'm using a wet glue to glue things down. It's just Scotch tacky glue, I believe, in that bottle. And getting things stuck down, because it is paint, I want to use a wet glue to make sure that things stay stuck to the page permanently. So now I'm using these. I got them on Amazon, so they're really fun. I think they're called Junk Journal Sentiment stickers or something like that if you want to go looking for them. Now, I didn't realize when I was doing this that they give you 2 copies of each sheet. So you can see there, if you look closely, that these 2 sheets that were on the top, here I am realizing, oh, it's the exact same that I just looked at. Duh. So let's look at this next one. You get 2 copies of each sheet, and you get them in both black and white. So 4 copies of the same sheet in there, just in 2 different colors in case you want to use them. So I threw those on there. I think it says, to love, celebrate kindness, let life surprise you. Love always gets, I don't know what that says. Sorry, I'm butchering that. You always gain by giving love. That's what it says. Just adding some white splatters to finish it off and tie it all together. And that's that. Thanks for watching.